The first thing to let you know, first of all, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. Happy to be here in glorious Madison, Wisconsin, even in the rain. Very happy to share some more of my thoughts with you. This is much more cutting edge than yesterday. Yesterday, much more traditional analysis. This is going to be very weird. And I'm happy to answer any questions at all about this. This is something I'm working on now, and the first thing to know is this title's clickbait. This is not really what I'm going to be talking about. It's just to get you in the room. There's actually maybe 3 ways of thinking about debate that aren't particularly American, but they do survive in America. There's one that is what I would call the future of debate, the debate yet to come that I think all of us in this room have a responsibility to frame and to wonder what that would be. So let's talk about 3 distinct moments going on in contemporary culture with relation to debate. First, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is elected to Congress, New York District 14, 5 minutes from my house. I'm not in her district, sadly, in Queens, but my representative's okay. But it's not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez okay, right? So she gets elected. Ben Shapiro, who's an internet pundit, you probably know who this is, challenges her to a debate, which seems obvious what it is at first. He's like, I just want to see if she knows how to do her job. She knows what things she would cut for her funding for a Green New Deal. She responds on Twitter and says, this is very typical of men to catcall me and expect a response, and I just don't think they deserve one. He says, I'm insulted that you would dismiss American debate tradition. I'll offer you $10,000 to debate me, kind of turning the catcall maybe into prostitution. I don't know why he thought that would help him. And then a third party said, well, a $10,000 donation to any city congressperson would be a violation of U.S. campaign laws. Can't happen anyway, so they didn't debate. That's one model. Another model is Elon Musk. Elon Musk offers to buy Twitter for about $42 billion, something like that, $45 billion. Why does he want to buy Twitter? He wants to take it private to, ironically, reveal the algorithm so we know what we're being seen, because Twitter is like a public commons. It's a civic debate space. This is the way he's talking about it. This is the way it's being talked about. So how weird. I'm going to buy a publicly traded company to turn it private to make it public for the benefit of civic debate. What a weird model, right? Another one, Republican National Committee withdraws from presidential debates. You won't see any more Republican presidential debates. They're out of it. They're not going to do the presidential debates anymore. This leaves the Republicans in trouble, Democrats in trouble, and also the Commission on Presidential Debates, who from 1988 has sponsored presidential debates. The reason why? It's unfair. Actually, I have a quote. Well, some of my notes are there. I have a quote from the RNC chairman about how it's unfair. They could have just made better provisions, and we would have continued to participate. That's basically what she said. So there's 3 weird models of debate. So what's going on here? What does it mean to debate? We have all these things are floating around. It seems like debate's an obvious term, something that would make a lot of sense. So I've been thinking about how is it that we understand debate. And the theory that I have encountered that I want to work through today is a theory from psychoanalysis. So psychoanalysis is sort of the founding of modern psychology through Sigmund Freud. It was picked up by a French practicing analyst, Jacques Lacan, who in the 1950s gave a series of lectures about this that were publicized. In his later lectures, he starts talking about psychoanalytic thought in society. The big difference is between him and Freud is the difference of the primacy of language. So Freud talks about a lot of different things that can go wrong with people in terms of mental health. Long list. There's lots of papers, lots of books, all this stuff. Lacan goes back to one of his earliest things and says, the most important thing Freud told us is that the unconscious is not accessible to us. We do things, and we wonder why we've done them. We've all had that experience. We're like, why did I say that? Am I a jerk? Who am I? Why do I want that? You go and you want to buy something you never bought, you buy it, and then you're like profoundly dissatisfied. Why did I do that? And this is the evidence for the unconscious that Freud points us to. Lacan says the most important line is that the unconscious has a structure, and that structure is like a language. That structure is like a language. So Lacan goes off on that language. So there are 4 ways we can think about debate using Lacan's theory of how we speak to each other. He came up with 4 models of this. And if you know anything about Lacan, he likes to use a lot of symbols to talk about this stuff. So the next slide I'm going to show you is very intimidating. This is like very typical of Lacan, but I'm going to walk you through it. These are the 4 models of debate I think we have, and these are the names he gave them. The Discourse of the Master, the Discourse of the University, the Discourse of the Analyst, the Discourse of the Hysteric. These 2 are the bad forms of debate. These 2 are the good forms of debate. This one kind of exists. This one doesn't exist at all. This is the one we have to create and think about. He also called this the revolutionary discourse. This is the one that's most exciting. This is the one that creates revolution in thinking. thinking and revolution and organization of human society. I'm calling them bad and good. He just said we roll through them in our daily life and we speak in these different ways to get different things done. We speak in the different way to get these different things done. So let me explain the symbols for you, and then I'll get to some examples that might be a little bit clearer. So these are the, I'm going to delete it anyway, because this is like, obviously, who's going to want to see this? Moving forward. The discourse of the sign of the master, S sub 1. What is the master signal? These are terms that have immediate meaning and value that we use in language. Things like democracy, freedom, family. These are the terms that organize the value of all other statements in society. The master is the sign of control, the sign of meaning. It makes all other meaning possible. So these are the things that come into play that make knowledge recognizable. Knowledge isn't really discovered, it's much more like in a Foucauldian sense, if you've read Michel Foucault. Knowledge is something that comes about by shifts in our perspective in relation to power. Lacan is saying these things come around not because of these shifts in power, but it's a similar kind of thing. Like, knowledge is something positive. There's a bunch of noise, there's a field of information, and then these things become valuable because the sign of the master has appeared, and this can change. And this is like a very dominating, nobody can really resist this. You have to sort of like capitulate to it. Knowledge, or the field of knowledge, S2. These are all the other symbols in society that are organized by the master signifier. There's a direct line. So things become more valuable, less valuable. Things become knowledge or information or noise based on the presence of the master signifier. So knowledge is never, the important thing to know is knowledge is never politically neutral. There's always some ideology, there's always some master, there's always some control, making knowledge make sense, right? It's never neutral. That's the thing to know about that. The split subject. This is what the normal human being looks like, which is that because you decided, according to Lacan, at some point in your life to learn how to speak, you have cut yourself off from the kind of enjoyment a child has, from the kind of pleasure a child has. Now, all of your pleasure is deferred to your ability to articulate what you want in words that someone else taught you. We're all speaking somebody else's language. Words existed before us. There's lots of philosophers talk about this, right? Like Heidegger, I don't know if you read Heidegger, thrown into language, we're thrown into this place. It's kind of similar here, the idea that we are speaking words that everyone else has heard before from other people. They're not our words, they're the words of the other. They're the words of the other, someone else. So we can't ever purely express what we want, and this creates a bit of separation, a bit of a split in our own mind of like, that makes us ask questions like, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? What's the purpose of life? What am I doing? This is all very healthy, by the way. This isn't some ill person. This is you, right? What am I doing? What am I supposed to be doing? Why do I like what I like? Is there a problem with me because I like what I like? Is there a problem with me because I don't like that TV show? These kind of questions. Because your desire is always encoded in the words of somebody else. And then the objet d'etat, or object causing desire, surplus desire, is represented by this, which is like the email symbol, which I think is very funny. Because like, who doesn't want more email? What a great symbol for desire, right? Or like Instagram handles or whatever. It's like, that's a great, it's funny that became the symbol of like an Instagram handle or a Twitter handle. Because like, talk about desire, Instagram. I mean, it's all about desire, and it's just unsatisfying, completely unsatisfying all the time. And it causes people to panic and be frustrated. It's like Lacan would love it, right? It's like, you would be really into it. So what this is the symbol of the object that sparks your desire. What is it that you think you want? How many times have you wanted something, you've gotten it, and you were like, profoundly underwhelmed? Yeah, most of the time, right? Because that's how it works. This object is somewhat transitory, it can move around, but it keeps you wanting things, keeps you moving. Like your goals are always changing. That keeps you alive, it keeps you driven. It's very healthy to have a drive to want things. And if you get it, it's okay for it to be disappointing because it makes you feel like, well, maybe that's not what I really want. You know, maybe I want something else. I have 5 Lamborghinis, the 6th one is going to be happy. What else do I want? Oh, maybe I want like a burger or something. So you can buy it. That's kind of a bad example. But anyway, that's what the symbols mean. And I'll explain it as we go into it. Now we've got to put them into relationships to think about how this works. So here's how to read the fractions. The agent, this is what Lacan calls it. I'm going to call it maybe the speaker, or sometimes debate itself, is in this position on the left at the top. The other is who they think they're speaking to or how they address the other. So debate appears in your life it's going to appear to speak to you in a certain way and call you something, identify you as something. Yesterday I was talking about intersectionality. We all have all these identities that are combined in all these different ways all the time. But like a Gestalt, rhetoric can pull one of these identities forward and address them and push other ones to the background. Like I might speak to you as a University of Wisconsin student or an American, something like that. All these identities are there together. So this is how it's presented. This is how it thinks of the audience, the other. The position of truth is always inaccessible. This is what's hidden by the agent behind the curtain. And it's really something that people might suspect is there, but they can't access it. Production is the result. So this is a good model for debate because it's like, how does debate appear? Or how do people who engage in debate want to appear? How do they treat you and think about your investment in debate? What are they hiding? And then what do we get? Think about it like that. Is everybody with me? This is very complicated. I'm moving very quickly, but we can cover it up in the field. Just don't belabor the point. So this is from Seminar 20. This is the way he talks about it in that. So the interesting thing to note is this and this have a direct relationship across the top. Across the bottom, there's absolutely no relationship. And the other can never actually access the truth, although they might suspect there's something going on. They might suspect. So let's get into some of those. The Discourse of the Master, or Debate via Expertise. We all watched this fine example of debating. I'm sure we did, right? This was just wonderful, right? Obviously, the problem is with the debate structure, right? It's unfair, right? You can agree with the Republicans, right? So, but anyway, I just don't think Joe Biden really is anything to write home about either. The Discourse of the Master, debate structured like this, looks like this. So we have debate presenting itself as mastery. I know. This is the way it is. And you, this is what you need to know. What's hidden is, I don't really know what I want. Right? So these people are just regular people. They present themselves as being in charge of the national, they know what the issues are. The issues are dictated to you. These are the issues, now you know what they are. What's left? Desire. What's left? I want something more. We could even call this frustration, right? So here's how I label it. Something is lacking, using Lacan's term there. Something is lacking. I watched that debate, but man, I don't feel like I got anything out of it. I feel frustrated. I feel angry. I feel like it's stupid. These kind of expressions come out of the Discourse of the Master. Because expertise is always a performance. It's always a flashing of a sun. There's never anything behind it. There's always somebody who's like, they don't know their full desire. Just like all of us, they're normal people. But they present themselves as being in charge of the issues. Right, so that's one way we can word it out. And there's lots of examples of this. Debate bro culture. There's some debate bro culture on the internet that doesn't really match this up. Debates suck, presidential debates suck. I think this is like Ted Cruz and Bernie on CNN, maybe. That's where this image came from. Here's another way to think about it, too. Another way to think about this model. And this is the kind of debate that none of you, I don't think, are interested in. And also, as being people who study debate or interested in debate, are probably very frustrated with what counts as national debate, especially on cable news and things like that, because it's given to you in this form. This is not a necessary model of debate, it's a choice. And you might think, why is it that our national political organization and our national media want this as the result? Why might that be? Why might that be? So if I'm frustrated and I feel like I need to know more, my solution is going to be to watch more CNN. Who's that benefit? CNN. Watch more Fox News. Who's that benefit? Fox News, right? Some multi-billion-dollar companies who make all their revenue on advertising, right? So this idea of frustrating, I don't really know enough, or I'm not really sure, is just going to feed you into consuming more as that might be one of them too. Or frustration might be like, I'm very frustrated that I can articulate Joe Biden's platform better than him. So you get kind of frustrated, you get more involved in sort of canvassing or supporting him. Or Trump, if you're that person. All right, the second one, University Discourse or clean civic debate. This is the one that's really fascinating to me because it seems like a solution to the Discourse of the Master, but it's really just kind of pasting over some of those issues with the Discourse of the Master. This is debate that's modeled in a way of pure rationality or reason. There's so many people out there who are like, oh, debates are a problem because people don't listen to facts. Debates are a problem because people can't reason. They can't use rationality. And that's what this discourse presents itself as. It's also a bad model of debate, I'm going to say. So here's the model for this one. Knowledge presents itself as self-ordering. Knowledge has no ideological baggage. Knowledge is knowledge, right? This is why it's called the University Discourse. The knowledge is like, here's what you're going to learn for your life. But hidden is an agenda. And we all kind of know the university has more interest than just our altruistic well-being. The university, we talk about this, right? We're like, why do they require that class? What's the real reason they require it? Who's really in charge, right? Is the military operating on campus? Are they, funding things? You hear this kind of stuff all the time, right? Or it's like, what do the trustees want? What does the president want? What's their agenda? What's the agenda? Is college conservative or liberal, right? And you hear this from both sides. You'd be like, well, college looks like education, but liberal indoctrinating professors are there to warp your little mind, get you on the wrong side of politics, the wrong side of history. You hear this too, right? This is why, like, whenever I talk about a Marxist, I write the red marker on the board because I don't want anybody calling Fox News on me or anything. Okay, everybody. Okay, conservatives in class. I'm going to talk about a Marxist now. I'm writing it in red, so you know there's no indoctrination here. But we think about that. So how does the university present itself to you? It's like, we want you, right? You either desire to be a part of this knowledge, or we want you to be a part of this knowledge. We want you to know, or you want that knowledge as president. And as a model of debate, we'll get into that in detail. What's produced? Somebody who isn't really sure of their desire, their motive. They're kind of like, well, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't really know why I feel this. I don't really know if I know anything. And that's kind of the production. So this has been critiqued or talked about in lots of critiques at the university. So the university produces really nice people who maybe aren't necessarily all that interested in taking a hard line in politics or being really activist or something like, well, I don't know. I guess it's okay. I'm not really sure. This kind of thing, which is what I like here. So here's how I wrote it in. We're going to talk about Stephen Crowder in a minute, who's, I think, an excellent example of University Discourse debate. It's this guy, Stephen Crowder. Who this is? The Change My Mind debate he bro. We're going to look at a clip here in a second. But the model here is one of the purest models of debate is civic engagement. So debate doesn't have any other engagement idea except for a pure civic engagement. Like it's the pure substance of democracy, right? It's just being civic. Like we're going to debate and we're going to remain calm. We're going to remain emotionless. We're just going to look at the facts. Now, I'm doing that, not out of altruism, but because I want a particular ideological engagement. And things like manners and things like attitude play into this too. Like, I think you're getting a little bit upset. I think you're getting angry. Why are you raising your voice? This kind of thing, right? So this is a really detestable kind of model of debate. Right? So it's like, but this is kind of like where we are in the United States, right? So the desire for the civic, I want to be a good debater. I want to be able to debate, and I want to be able to spread the truth. I want to be able to calmly convince other people to come to my side. And then the result is this idea of calm and rational discourse, which is, plain yogurt, kind of like, mayonnaise is too spicy kind of vibe, right? It's kind of this feeling of like, well, why would I want to get into a debate? This is why people are frustrated by debate. Outside people who study it, like most of you in this room do. They get frustrated by it because it doesn't include all the humanity has been stripped out. There's no emotion, there's no feeling, there's no rage, there's no sadness, none of that is there. It's like it's flavorless. It's like plain yogurt. It's like the result is, which I think is a good way of thinking about the split subject here. So I think I have a short clip. Yeah, Stephen Crowder.
Or men's sports. So you just believe that there should be no divisions at all. It should just be all men and women compete against each other.
Not quite. So here's what I think.
So it doesn't matter.
So my position's a little bit more nuanced than that. So if you're born with a penis, right, and you start taking hormone.
So let me set this up a little bit better for you before it goes into it. So they're debating biological males should not compete in women's sports, a topic that Crowder selected, right? So that's another part of this too. Is it's like, this is a position that people would want to debate on, and he just goes to these university campuses and debates his college students who just come and sit down and argue with him, and he debates them. But what he's going to perform here is kind of the perfect university discourse model of debate. This kind of civic engagement that looks as if it's exactly what we would want, but it's an unsatisfying model of debate. It's not unsatisfying because he's taking a conservative line or anything like that. It's unsatisfying because all it does is defer the mastery, the ideology, the commitment to a particular worldview to a position where no one can access it. Remember, the sign of the master is in the position of inaccessibility in this discourse. Right? Nobody can unveil the mastery, though they might want to. Right? Even though they might really try to, you can't really get there. So it's a very frustrating kind of discourse. So watch this and see if you agree. It's only a couple of minutes long, so let's see if I can figure out how a Mac works. Here we go.
Or men's sports. So you just believe that there should be no divisions at all. It should just be all men and women compete against each other.
Not quite. So here's what I think.
Oh, okay, so it doesn't matter.
So my position's a little bit more nuanced than that. So if you're born with a penis, right, and you start taking hormone therapy, it changes the way your muscles grow, right? So like after a couple of years or after a couple of months, you're on estrogen, your muscles change and they start growing like female muscles do, and you're not actually given that much of an advantage, or they don't have as much of an advantage as you think they might.
Are you sure about that?
Well, I guess I'm not sure, but I'm also not sure about anything.
Don't start it off that way. Then why are you sitting down?
They already know that.
Yeah, but I don't know that. It's not fair for me to beat up on a quote-unquote fucking moron.
All right,
I'm not trying to...
So, okay, I don't have scientific peer-reviewed studies at my back to, quote.
Right.
That's just as I understand. You take these hormones, it changes the way your body works. Your body becomes more feminine. You lose that, masculine muscle mass that you might have. And so after a couple of months of hormone therapy, a couple of months or a year, it doesn't make that much of a difference.
Okay.
Now,
what if that was entirely incorrect?
If that were entirely incorrect, then yeah, that would be different. That would be completely different. But then I think we need to reevaluate.
So let's say it's entirely incorrect, it would be different. You mean that males should compete with biological males and biological males should compete with biological females. Assuming that just a couple months, or even a year, even 2 years of the hormone replacement therapy doesn't make that much of a difference.
If it doesn't make that much of a difference, I think that you could make that argument. I also think that's more.
It doesn't make much of a difference.
It doesn't make much of a difference. I think
no,
it's
as a
more.
matter of fact, after a year, two reasons why.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to go to a separate argument, but I want to kind of hold you to what you just said because I think maybe we agree. Because this is something that a lot of people don't know. They've done these studies. They've conducted them. And I always make all the references available on the website as this goes out. After a year, so 2 points, after a year of hormone replacement therapy, hormone suppression specifically for a man, for women, they lose about 5% of their total strength, muscle density, actual volume of muscle. Okay? There are also other benefits that remain. So first off, it's not about testosterone when you're taking it. Testosterone in utero and testosterone specifically through puberty, it's not just muscle strength. Anyone who's done strength training or sports knows there's muscle volume, there's muscle strength, there's muscle density, there's fast twitch muscle fibers, there's slow twitch muscle fibers, there's anaerobic capacity, there's VO2 max, there's lung capacity.
Okay. So I think it's enough of that. See what he's doing here. So this is why this is the discourse of the universe. It's profoundly unsatisfying. He's saying, I don't have a stake in any of this. I'm just showing you the information. And this is, of course, the persuasive move. Like, the best persuasive moves. You should educate them. Here's the information. Right? It's the most beautiful persuasive move you can make. It's also profoundly unsatisfying in a debate, because in a debate, evidence, as we all know, is something that's mutually agreed upon. We might have this debate and say, we might throw the finger to scientific study and say there are other reasons why we want to have this thing done. But Crowder doesn't permit that, because it's like, well, this is a neutral, like debate has a civic and a evidence structure that I don't have any stake in at all. This exists, and I'm just participating in it as a form of headless knowledge, as Lacan calls it, knowledge without a head, right? So there's nobody organizing it, there's nobody with a stake in it. And he plays it out quite beautifully. He makes it sound as if these are facts, but it's actually this incredibly nicely structured kind of debate format. We could do it in a different way and get a very different result. So he represents us. This is just pure knowledge. I'm just holding you to what you believe. I don't believe. I'm just making pure knowledge. This guy really does want to. You can tell he really has desire. He's really pushing to be a part of this collection of knowledge. In this way, he wants to be the civic and calm and rational kind of debater. He's a little kind of like, knowledge is a result of a position or a perspective, in this case, biological one, right? And one that's based on a particular kind of scientific research, with a particular funding structure, with a particular stake in the researchers. And then there's a hesitation or delay in participating. This is the most dangerous thing about this model of debate, is because once you go through it, or if you connect yourself to this model of debate, you will hesitate in participating in the civic, right? What do people say in class all the time when the professor is trying to start a discussion that's a little bit edgy? Well, this is just my opinion, but, right? Why do we do that? This is my opinion about this, because we understand ourselves as not being completely understanding of our desire, our relationship in this discourse. So we have to put that in there. Another one you do, I'm not trying to judge, but judgment. This is the way speech with discourse speaks us, Lacan says, in a lot of ways. You can see that. Like, these are the tickets of entry to a conversation in society. This is just my opinion, but I mean, that's kind of unhealthy for democracy, right? To be hesitant. It's not factocracy. It's not truthocracy. It's not scientocracy. It's democracy. Demos means people. People with their experiences and views and their own way of articulating things. So why do we say it's just my opinion, but we should say, here's what I think, and be wrong, and then someone else can respond to that, and then that's how democracy works. It's about everybody's perspective, including people like Crowder who think there's only one possible perspective because it's neutral and knowledge and discoverable, when actually it's constructed in a way to back up a particular way of seeing the world, right? The politics of science, for example. Right? This kind of thing, right? And it was requested that I make fun of Bill Nye. Right? This kind of thing. So like, yeah, you can watch a YouTube video. I didn't put it in the thing, but there's this great YouTube video where somebody asked Bill Nye, "Isn't philosophy or literature a wonderful way of explaining the world just like science?" And he's like, "I'm sorry, I just can't see any value. Like, no value, right?" So if he's coming here, right, you should ask him if he thinks there's value in philosophy and see what he says. He'll be like, "I don't think there's any value." Neil deGrasse Tyson's in the same thing. There's no value in that. Science explains the world. Science explains the world. We don't need anything else. And of course, he gets dragged on Twitter, like monthly, because he'll say something, be like, "Well, science is proven up." And then other scientists are like, "No, you're wrong." Right? They just drag him. Same with Bill Nye, right? Bill Nye had that debate against the creationist Ken Ham in Tennessee. You know about this? Go watch that debate. It's fun. Because they're doing two different models of debate, two completely different models of discourse. And Bill Nye's like, "I totally won," but it was like a Pyrrhic victory, right? Because he just like argues from this point of view. And then everyone's like, "Well, yeah, but we know that science is given to us by God, right?" So there's a superior perspective on this to the other. I'm out of time.
No, that might be the front door. I'll just jump.
Oh, okay. Who's coming over, kids? I feel like I'm like doing a TV show now.
Yes, star coming through the doors.
Blue's Clues.
Bill Nye.
You guys are too young for Blue's Clues? When did you guys watch it?
No.
You guys watch Blue's Clues? I just feel older over here. Alright, so this also extends to other popular forms of debate. This is from the Monk debates, which is Toronto debates like Intelligence Squared. Look at how they talk about debate and the model of debate. This is also the discourse of the university, straight up, right? You should be able to hear both sides of an issue and make up your mind. Who gets to decide what the both sides are? What if an issue has 5 sides? How does this model help us then? Right? What if it's 20 sides, right? It's not a very conducive model to that, but it's a very conducive model to creating people who are subjects of power, people who are not comfortable because they don't feel like they have complete control over knowledge of involving themselves in civic affairs. Who does that benefit? If the population is like, "Oh, I don't know, I don't have enough facts to engage in these political debates," who does that benefit? Who does that benefit? Hint, they're all in Washington. So, Intelligence Squared, another great. I've done an Intelligence Squared debate myself. Ernest wrote, "Global conversation enables people to make informed decisions about the issues that matter in the company of the world's greatest minds and orators." Well, if I'm with the greatest minds and orators, what point does my position even have? Like, I'm supposed to make up my own mind, but here is headless knowledge. Once again, they're already determined to be the greatest. What possible input could you have? Follow the knowledge. We want you to be a part. Fold yourself into the dough. Right? It's a horrible model. And of course, now we're going to hit even closer to home. American policy debate. Anybody in here familiar with American policy debate? Let's watch this video, and I hate to drag my friends at Wake Forest, but I'm going to drag you a little bit. This is a promotional video for debate at the Wake Forest University Debate. All of my friends are in this. I don't know if I should do this, but listen to how they talk about the value of American competitive policy debate. Just listen and think about desire, and think about signs of mastery, and think about headless knowledge, and just listen to how they talk about the value of debate. You're going to be shocked.
We got 4 great debaters. I know they've both been working hard. This is going to be an awesome debate because we're going to see some clash right now.
It is one of the most difficult things you can commit yourself to. It is one of the most intellectually challenging games that a person can play. And the way that you win feels so immediately rewarding in the moment. It's tough to find anything else that has the highs and lows of intercollegiate debate. Like you are winning this activity and people are basically like validating your personal intelligence, and it's like it becomes an addiction in a weird way. There's something competitive inside of you that always just wants to, I don't know, prove that you're the best.
It pushes you to think outside of what you're comfortable with, but beyond that, it's like a game. It's the element of surprise, right? What could come next?
Your capacity is self-defined, and if you find that you can handle more pressure, you can handle difficult ideas, and you can handle lots of information and bring it together in unique ways, and you can handle overload. Being able to find out what your capacity is huge.
Think about it this way. A student is talking 400 words a minute, researching at the level of a master's student would for their Ph.D., battling back and forth, and then doing that over an entire weekend and then over an entire season. Well, when that student is done with debate, that student knows how to process arguments. They know what is persuasive. And so the rest of the world in their class literally operates in slow motion.
Because I suppose it'd be like watching a chess match without any sense of what's going on. But it is like a chess match, in that once you know the intricacies that are going on, is endlessly fascinating.
Why are EHRs inevitable?
No, you said why are they? That's what I'm saying. Currently they're in place in a lot of places because they...
So why is that system that has it in place inevitable then?
Because it's a form of like... There's not much more of a group that I've ever encountered that enjoys reading books and then arguing and thinking about them. What about the Black Panthers engaging in community healthcare was in the service of taking down? What do they do?
They're the type of person who fundamentally enjoys a fierce argument.
How do we know that that operates separate? Because that is through right? So empirics.
I enjoy the feeling of researching, learning more, competing more.
All the moving parts, the way different arguments interact. I guess that process to me intellectually is pleasing.
The research you do, the kind of ideas you can put forward and get away with, it's just unprepared.
They're competitive, they're genuinely intellectually curious, and they really enjoy the process and challenge of argumentation.
We don't tell the...
Okay, so you can see there's like very little there other than this questing after desire. We're about to drag BP, no? But that's American policy debate, and for those of you unfamiliar with it, that is the speed of delivery of a typical policy debate of 400 words a minute. So some of you nodding, some recovering policy people in here. Most of the people in this video I've taught with and coached against. But look at the language. It's like nothing compares to that feeling. Chasing that feeling. This is like what Lacan called excess desire. It's like I win, but it's not enough. There's some feeling that can't be symbolized. There's some feeling I can't articulate in language. I have to do it again and again and again. Freud called it the compulsion to repeat. A very normal human attitude, a very normal human thing. But it's like, oh, that felt good, but I can't quite really wrap my head around why that felt so good. I want to do it again. I want to do it again. And the way they articulate it, it shows there's really nothing more there than the questing after desire. Right? And the quest, I want to be a part of this knowledge. And then you hear the professor saying they know what's persuasive. Well, great, Jared, that's great. I mean, there's thousands of pages of research out there that says we don't really know how this works, but that's great that they know it's persuasive. They know how argument works. It's a little wild. It's like this, like they're going to be a part of this knowledge. But a lot of times, as we well know, what's persuasive is dependent on things like ideology, dependent on things like the way capital operates, dependent on things based on like where people come from in the world, their upbringing, all these different factors being persuasive and moving around. Maybe that's what he means, but I think it's also just pure enjoyment of being part of the system of knowledge. British parliamentary debate, which I think you guys do here, is a very different model, but I want to play a little bit of a chief adjudicator briefing. Oh yeah, so here's some of the things, like what it's teaching is kind of a systematic knowledge. So here's something from a Introduction to Parliamentary Debating guide talking about response, that there are just 3 different kinds of responses, not true, even if. And this is just how you debate. So it's teaching this knowledge of like, it doesn't really matter what the content is, as long as you have it structured the right way, you're arguing properly. Right? You're arguing properly. No human emotion, no stake in it. There's a structural way of doing it. There's just a structural way of doing it. This is from a friend of mine wrote this thing. How to judge. What a judge should never do is bring his or her own knowledge into the debate. What? What kind of weird model is that? No, debate's already been set. Debate doesn't require any human knowledge at all. It's almost like a sausage machine. There's some kind of weird, like, I don't know, I think about Kafka's story, The Prison Colony. There's the machine that you throw the prisoners into and just tattoos them, whatever they've done. But then the warden falls in and doesn't really know what to do. Anyway, it feels like a machine where, I mean, what kind of debate model would you want where people don't bring their own experiences and knowledge to the table when they're thinking about an issue? That's weird. What is being evaluated in debate when we say, let's remove all the human ideology, all the human perspective from it, let's just judge what, I mean, that's just like a weird kind of pure enjoyment, right? But I mean, there are people pushing against this more in the policy debate world than in the BP world. I don't think people are being very meta in the BP world yet. I think it's coming. Where people are like, I refuse to debate this motion because of its ideological implications. And I'm going to give a speech about why Native people should have their ancestral lands returned to them. Now, this regularly happens in policy. It's so normal, it's almost kind of boring. But if that happened at BP, people wouldn't know what to do. They're like, I refuse to debate this motion that is in service of the military-industrial complex. I'm going to talk to you about rights, whatever I want. I'm going to use this time to change your mind. So it's coming. I'm pretty sure it's coming. But it's very strange to put yourself aside. What is it that knowledge that you're trying to be informed into, right? I think I have another video. Yeah. This is a chief adjudicator explaining how to judge.
When you're evaluating arguments and when you're judging a BP debate, I think there's 3 principles that are quite useful to follow. The first one is the principle of non-intervention. What does this mean? Judges are inevitably going to be quite biased. We all have arguments we prefer, we all have debates we've been in and things we've run, we all have political leanings. But whenever we judge, we need to make sure that we minimize that kind of subjective input into the debate. Because inherently, the more that we involve ourselves, the more subjective the poll is going to become. The ideal situation would be for any debate, regardless of who is judging them, to have the same results. That's very difficult to achieve, but we want to come as close to that as possible. What does this mean? When we are judging, we want to avoid biases, we want to avoid preferences, any particular knowledge that we have, we don't want to insert that into the debate. We don't want to insert premises for the teams, we don't want to insert intuitions, value judgments, impacts, conclusions, or rebuttal. And if you ever have to do that because it's the only way to determine a debate, or because teams haven't given you metrics on how to assess the debate, then do it as little as possible, using as objective a metric as possible, and please do it in a way that you can justify to the teams. Essentially, we want to judge purely on what the teams tell us, and we want to intervene as little as possible into the debate and just judge the debate that happened.
Okay, that's pretty weird. It sounds good. If you're like a debater, you're like, yeah, that's how it should be. That's how it should be. But if you think about it, what a strange model of debate. What is being taught here? What is being practiced here? What's the model of debate people take into the civic from this? Right? Like, don't intervene, don't bring your own views in. I mean, I kind of think that might be what debate's about. No audiences, is what she said. We don't want audiences. Because audiences will ruin the purity of the knowledge of what good argument is. Right? This is monastic. This is like high-level analytic philosophy. This is not something very civic, not very connected to human beings, not very useful for democracies or democratic practice. It is very, very useful if you like want to be like some kind of like, you know, Benedictine monk and live in your little convent and practice your stuff. I mean, there's a reason they don't proselytize. It's not their job. They're not meant to go and do that. So this is such a strange model, such a weird model to me. But it gets practiced all the time and it makes us feel good. But whether the master's hidden or whether the master's in plain view, the result is either frustration or uncertainty. So these models of debate are bad models of debate that probably shouldn't be taught. What should be taught? That's the question. What should we be debating? So let's look at some alternative things. Okay, so here's the way I would view the chart again. Base knowledge of argument. We desire to learn debate. Arguments inevitably involve bias, failing alone, and I will push that down, right? In fact, the reason an issue comes forward is because of people's ideology. Like, we're always frustrated by what the topics are that are being debated in the news and things like that. We're always frustrated. Who decided this was important? Like, why do we have to talk about the Oscars slap for a month or whatever, right? Like, who's deciding these kind of things, right? People will say that. And then they'll be like, wow, we're not really talking about the Ukraine war as much as we were. Who's deciding these things? It's just kind of natural, kind of human, the waves of ideology. But all that's pushed down. A good argument and a persuasive argument are split. They don't have any access to each other. It might be a way of thinking about the product. Which is like, well, these are good arguments, but I kind of feel this other way. People do this all the time. People can make 100 on a logical fallacy test and go vote for Trump. How do you square that? It's because this is the model of argument we're teaching at the university. That's how. Right? Or teach people what good evidence standards are, or how we know what a fact is, or what good scientific reasons are. And they're still like, oh no, vaccines are controlling your mind through 5G or whatever. Right? This is the same group of people. They aren't exceptions. Right? All right. These are the two bad models of debate. These are the models of debate that got us where we are with the first three examples, really. We're not really sure what debate is. We have a lot of uncertainty. What can we do about it? Well, we can do what Lacan calls a hysterics discourse, which is where we present ourselves as a unique and unsymbolizable form. We take that part where we say, usually we capitulate to the master. But instead, what if we put ourselves out there and we say, that doesn't really work for me. I'm not really like that. It kind of works for me. That's kind of what I'm like. Maybe I'm also kind of like this. And you're kind of moving around through your identities in this way. That kind of frustrates people who are very comfortable with the side of mastery. So you present yourself as being like, I'm not really sure if I'm like that. Constantly. And people then respond to you by presenting the signs of mastery. They're like, no, you like this, you're a this, you're a that, you're a that. And you just keep saying, I don't know, unsatisfying. But you really do kind of know what you want. And what you really want is this kind of, you want these signs kind of sent to you all the time in the basic model. You kind of want it. That's what you desire. You desire that for people to try to master it. You desire that. You want people to kind of tell you what they... And sometimes this is pleasurable for all of us, right? We want to hear what our friends think of us. Oh, well, you're like this, or you're this kind of thing. So this is not an illness, right? So hysteria gets a bad rap in critiques of psychoanalysis because it's thought of as kind of a sexist diagnosis, right? That's not what's going on here. It's saying this is a healthy way that we present ourselves sometimes, this object of uncertainty. And people kind of freak out. Like, oh, you don't have a role. Let me try to help you. What's produced? Knowledge. We know a lot, but we might not know a lot in a direct line from like, oh no, but you're really good at math, you're an engineer. So we might learn a lot about that. We might learn a lot about our relationship to the master signifier. We might not fall into those old labels, we generate new knowledge. So Lacan calls this the discourse of teaching. This is what good teachers do. Right? Good teachers come in and ask a bunch of questions and get you thinking. Like, but why is that? Why is that the way it is? I don't know if that's really the argument. Did this really start because of that? And then everyone starts presenting, they're like, no, because economics says, because math says, because science says. Like, really? I'm not so sure. Right? They just continue. But teachers know that they don't really feel that way. They're masking. They know what they want. They want you to create knowledge on your own. So I was just looking at debate. Well, we have an indeterminate situation. We might not even know how many sides it is. We might not even know if it's debatable. And then we approach it from what we know about debate. Pare it down. But the situation is really understandable. It's meant to generate knowledge in a clash between our traditional debate models that we have from the two bad forms of discourse, that we then would generate something new. Knowledge, but not what we thought we wanted, which is sometimes great. That happens, right? You're like, wow, I took that class, I thought it was going to be about X or Y, or man, I attended that lecture about the 4 forms of American debate. Boy, howdy, look what I got. This is really hot garbage or great. I don't know. I don't have a vibe. But that would be, it actually is understandable, but not understandable in terms of like these, the master signifiers that we have in the debate. So what are some models for this? Well, I kind of took a look around. So in 1916, there was a huge debate in my field in rhetoric about what is debate. And there's a debate that started in 1916 and continues today of whether or not it's appropriate to think of debate as a game. What do we gain and lose through this metaphor? This is somebody I've written a lot of scholarship about with Paul Davis, who's a debate coach in the early 1990s, 1915, 1916. He taught for a very long time. And he wrote this essay, and this started the whole thing. All of this started because of Teddy Roosevelt, wrote an autobiography that appeared where he was like, I'm a Harvard man. You know how these people are. I'm a Harvard man. But one thing I'm very proud I never did at Harvard was debate. You know what debate does to you? It removes your backbone. You're no longer a man because you just go back and forth on whatever issue you want. You're like a dilettante. You can just talk about whatever side. You can't stand for anything. It ruins your backbone. We need men with backbone to lead this country. I'm like, backbone? What a weird thing in the body to pick. for like some kind of masculine power symbol, right? But all through the 19th century, people were talking about backbone. This is like a political insult. They're like, the man has no backbone. I'm like, isn't it like a lot of bones? I mean, maybe they just didn't take. Maybe another class you didn't take at Harvard was like anatomy. I don't know. But anyway, since somebody of that level of popular opinion had charged it, started a firestorm with this, like, how do we understand it? Debate is primarily a game. So Davis's model is called the counterfeit presentment. I've written an essay on this, and I think it's a pretty good model of the hysterics discourse, which is let's make debate as much like a parliamentary chamber or some kind of decision-making body as possible, and then make the arguments that work on the people who are in that room for their own self-interest. The opposite model of what we just heard from that chief adjudicator, which is where we would remove people's personal view, remove the humanity from the room. He's like, let's make the room as human as possible, or even hyper-human. And that's what he's proposing in 1960. This is J.M. O'Neill's response to it, and he says that, well, no, you have experts in debate and experts in juggle. Anybody can tell you which singer they liked in a song competition, but only expert in music can tell you who actually sang the song best. That was his argument. He also talks about like cattle judging, which is kind of weird. It's like only the expert can tell you which cow is actually the best cow. What a weird example. And that's what he's opposed to Davis, writing in 1916. And he says, no, there is an expertise in debate. There's a difference between saying which argument you prefer and which argument is best. Now, O'Neill won that debate, I would say. That's the way we think about debate today. Direct line from James O'Neill all the way here to 2022, over 100 years ago. We still tend to think about like unwashed masses watching a debate will just choose what they prefer based on their own biases, but the actual good debate judge can tell what argument is good against their own feelings, right? And that's a model, that was a choice. Davis lost, right? We don't have that model anymore, but that model might be a solution to some of the problems we see in the civic from the models of debate that get taught. The Master's Discourse, the University Discourse, the Hysterics Discourse. Howard Woodward got it right in the 1920s when his debate team said, we want to debate the motion. Now, in these days, they did a motion for a long time, for almost a whole year, and they would just research it. And they're like, we want to do the motion that the United States should become a socialist government. 1920, okay? You might go to prison for that, right? This is the Red Scare. This is the formation of the ACLU, right? You know the ACLU, right? As my uncle, R.I.P., used to call it, the Atheist Liberals and Communist Union. Well, he was very conservative, but the ACLU defends people's civil rights. All that was going on this time. He said, well, if we decided to do this, we couldn't find any judges. Judges were usually pulled from the university or elected officials in local office to judge the debate. Nobody would dare judge the debate fairly because they wouldn't want to say, I think communism would be great for America, and then immediately lose the next election or go to jail, right, for sedition, right? So he said, well, let's debate without judges. Now, a lot of graduate students have read this, and I've heard papers on this where I just have to laugh because they're like, that does sound cool to have the debate happen and there's nobody else in the room except the debaters. Because that's probably the model you have in your head, because when you debate, there's just one judge or maybe three judges in the room, right? So it'd be like, you would just be in the room by yourself. But no, Woodward assumes there would be an audience of several hundred people who come to watch the debate too. That's what's missing from our modern practice. There just wouldn't be any judges. The audience would just go home and think about the debate. So the audience being removed from debate is a function of the university discourse, because if I have knowledge, and that knowledge is not determinate on a particular ideology by particular people who have a stake in it, what's the point of having the audience there? We know what good argument is. We just have to access and practice and refine that knowledge. That's the discourse of the university. The discourse of the hysteric is like, I don't think that model of debate works for me. And people are like, what? I don't think that evidence works for me. What? You know, it's like, but forwarding that as a political position, as an act, is kind of what's going on. So he says, let's not have judges. They had the debate. It was very valuable. They learned a lot about socialism. They learned a lot about these things. And the audience was like, wow, I can't believe they're saying these things, and they make sense. So it was transformative. It did not provide knowledge about whether or not a communist government or socialist government would be good for the United States, but it provided knowledge about the relationship between socialism and capitalism in our economy, our society, and what works persuasively, which is probably the best kind of knowledge. It's still fairly conservative, right? We're not really creating anything new. We're just playing with the existing master-power relationships, right? Audience is the most important thing. And so one of the things I study is the universal audience, which is this theory from Perlman or Tinica, which is something missing from the first two forms of debate, which is when you speak, you should imagine the best kind of thinker that you might encounter when you're speaking to an audience, and then make your arguments towards that. So it's very localized, it's very immediate, it's very temporal, it's not atemporal, like in the form of the university discourse would be like, this is an argument that would access everybody. It's just the people who I want to persuade at their best thinking moment. How would I speak to them? I think it's a very powerful theory for this kind of thing. So, what else do I have? Oh yeah, picture of it with accidentally took this picture. These are my friends. All right, so the other thing is triangular leagues and pentagular leagues, which are the old model of doing debate with 3 universities. So I bet you can go to the archive here at the library and look up the Wisconsin Debate Triangular League. I bet they had a pentagular league too, which is an agreement between 3 universities to debate one topic for the year. You would come to debate, I'd be like, here's the topic, how do you feel about it? You'd say, I agree with it. I'd be like, great, you're an affirmative, you're a government debater for the whole year. You don't like it, you're negative for the whole year. And then the affirmative team would go to another college, their affirmative team would come here, we do the debate on the same night in front of an audience, take an audience vote, tally the results, share them. At the end of the season, we declare a champion. That was the way debate was done for the majority of the time in American history, in terms of intercollegiate debate. Except for like the colonial colleges. They started the triangular leagues, so they were doing it more as an educational thing. I have long lists of debate topics from the 1700s that are very funny, from Yale and places like that. The funniest one that I'll share with you is, do specters appear? That's from like a debate in 1720. We could have that debate now. Do specters appear? It's like ghost hunters or something. It's very funny. So this is kind of a way of doing it too, because you're not, the audience is going to be not really sure. They might come in with their agenda, but they don't really know why they believe what they believe. And you're going to throw, as a debater, the signs of mastery at them. They want a resolution to this. They're not going to get it because no one can access what's here. But they will get knowledge about the way they think about argument. That's usually the result of these debates, which I think is better than positing that we know what argument is, that we know what persuasion is, and that we divorce any kind of human, I mean, evolutionary psychology is telling us a lot about the relationship of argument, reason, and speech. And they're saying that reason has no evidence of being evolutionarily pushed. Like, there's no reason to say that's an evolutionary adaptation. But argument is, the evidence from the experiments continue to show that argument is the evolutionary adaptation of human psychology, not reason. We created reason to have different flavors of argument with each other. That's what the new research indicates, which is fascinating because most people would have that the other way around. They say, reason and rationality brought us civilization. No. Arguing with each other did. So I would want to strip that out in favor of reason. It's very funny. Like, all we want is flavoring and nothing else. It's like Zizek's argument about caffeine-free Diet Coke. What are you drinking? If you remove the caffeine and you remove the sugar, what are you drinking? You're literally drinking nothing, but in capitalist consumer form. This is Zizek's powerful argument about Diet Coke. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but anyway. Elton Abernathy, my hero, he said, debate tournaments are destroying debate. He wanted to ban debate tournaments. In 1941, he put that up to national vote. It got tabled, and then Pearl Harbor happened. After the war, we come back and debate tournaments are the normal way of doing things. Debate tournaments also convey this idea of kind of headless knowledge. Most debate instruction is, how do you win the tournament? How do I do a whip speech? How do I crop? How do I do a counter crop? How do I do a second government thing when my first government has frozen me out? These are all questions about how to win a tournament, not questions about argument. So it's even further removed, that system of knowledge, from thinking about argument or debate. It's even further removed, because now you're just talking about the tournament. Abernathy realized this in the 1940s. It just got disrupted by history or everything, but he's a great person to read about this kind of thing. He's talking about how these tournaments have really destroyed any educational value of the discourse of debate. Anybody know who this is? Probably not. This is Adlai Stevenson. Adlai Stevenson, former governor of Illinois. He was the lucky Democrat to run against Dwight Eisenhower. God, that's an easy victory. He did it twice. He didn't win. He can say, I was a pretty fine governor of Illinois. I did all this great stuff. And Eisenhower's like, I defeated Hitler. Go vote, right? So he had to run against him twice. He's kind of grumpy. He's looking pretty happy here. Adlai Stevenson was very frustrated about running for the Democratic. If you know, Adlai Stevenson's responsible for this thing called superdelegates. If you're a Democrat and you're angry about superdelegates, maybe you're a Bernie bro or something, this is the man to blame, right? Go read the history of this, because he's the guy most directly responsible for this, because he went in national media and said, these primaries are garbage. I have to go to Wisconsin. He literally said this. I have to go to Wisconsin and I have to eat cranberries and talk about fruit flies and pretend like I care. And this is stupid. This shouldn't be an issue for the president. I got to go to Florida and drink orange juice and talk about frostbite. This is dumb. We should have a higher level. And he proposed in an essay that he wrote that television as a technology could create a way to, this is so Whiggish actually, this is very Whig, right? Maybe Stevenson's the last Whig, maybe we can have this discussion later, I don't know. But I just thought of that actually after a conversation last night. We can have this conversation of a national presidential issue Now, he wrote this in 1960 because he wasn't going to run again. He did try to get nominated as a dark horse, but Kennedy blew him out of the water. But he started this, and then Congress picked up and said, maybe we should have a great debate. And this is the birth of the presidential debates, says Adlai Stevenson. But Stevenson didn't want the presidential debates in the master's discourse. He wanted in the hysterics discourse, which is, let's have people kind of talk about what they think those issues are, and then we can respond to them as candidates. Or we can say, here's what we've heard. So it's a very undefined kind of thing is what he wanted. But the power of television would allow us to do that, he thought. If Congress and the three networks, yes, three networks, would donate the time and the technology to do it, then if Congress would make it legal, because it was illegal at the time to do that, the networks couldn't broadcast political stuff unless they gave every single candidate the same amount of time. So the Kennedy-Nixon debates in 1960 happened because of an act of Congress that suspended the Federal Telecommunications Act provisions for 1 year for that. And that's how that happened. But then it took 16 years for the next one to happen in 1976, which is the Carter-Ford debate. There were no presidential debates between them. LBJ said, I don't need to debate, I'm the president. That guy needs to show what he can do, not me. I'm the president. That's a very LBJ kind of attitude. But anyway, so Stevenson, I would say, is proposing kind of a hysterical discourse, in a way, as opposed to one where it's like, well, let's tell the people what the issues are, with a national TV journalist, with a commission that has no accountability to anyone but itself and the two parties. Not like that, but a more open one where the issues are undefined and the candidates respond. That's hysterics. What about this one? The final one I'll talk about, one I'm not sure about, is the analyst's discourse, which is the discourse of revolution. How does this one work? It presents itself as you want this. You're like, I don't know. What is it? But it's like, no, you just want it. And it doesn't give you any knowledge about itself. It hides knowledge. But it makes itself incredibly desirable. And the reason he calls it the analyst discourse is like therapy, where you're talking about your life to your therapist goes, or interesting. Can you say more about that? You're like, what, tell me what to do. Like, tell me what's wrong with me. And, I don't think there's something wrong. And so you want them more and more. You want this knowledge they're hiding away. More and more and more and more. What's produced by this? Mastery. On your own terms. A master signifier that you're comfortable with capitulating your unknown desire or your discomfort with being called something, with being labeled. You create your own kind of master signifier to make sense of the world on your own terms. You don't feel guilty about it. You don't feel bad about it. So how does this transfer into debate? Well, there is a form of debate like this. I don't know if you've seen this before. Have you ever seen Tibetan monks debate? Watch a little bit of this. This is part of, if you wanted to become a Tibetan Buddhist monk, this is your curriculum. This is what you're doing in school. So watch a little bit of this. It might be a little bit too long.
To understand Tibetan Buddhism, there's no better way than watching monk debate. Alright, what is monk debate in the first place? In Tibet, a monastery is like a Buddhism school, and monk debate, just like the dissertation defense in college, is the unique way for Tibetan monks to attain a higher understanding of Buddha's teaching. However, the process of higher understanding doesn't come easy. During the monk debate, you will see an intense but meanwhile peaceful scene. On one hand, standing monks would use exaggerated whip-like handplay to ask questions related to some Buddhism philosophical topics. Then, another sitting monk or several monks answer the question based on their comprehension of Buddhism scriptures, and the two sides then argue back and forth with a mix of drastic loud clapping, aggressive pointing, an intense verbal exchange that makes you somewhat understand it, even if you have no idea what they're saying. On the other hand, when you are just thinking they are about to fight, the peaceful smile on every monk's face indicates that they're actually enjoying it a lot. It is this unique style that keeps captivating tourists from all over the world. If you want to see this unique monk debate, the best places to go to are the three major Tibetan monasteries.
Yeah, call your travel agent. We get it. Okay. Alright, so with that looks really weird, but it doesn't look any weirder, I think, than maybe American policy debate or the things that we do at BP. It's a particular format meant to teach something. But what's really interesting here is that this This is taught so that monks gain mastery, but not mastery over Buddhism, which would be impossible and actually kind of contradicting the principles of true mastery. But it also would be this idea of, I am creating my own questions. I have my own approach to this. I have my own way of owning these questions and engaging these questions about knowledge, so that now I can go and engage anyone who I encounter in a way that I think communicates this way. So the object of desire in this case would be, I think I have one that's more specific to this, but it's something you want, you know there's something behind it, you have this kind of uncivilized identity, nothing really fits for you, you're like, I don't really know where I stand, or I'd like to know better who I am, or what I stand for, what I believe. Mastery is the result. This is revolutionary because you're creating new master signifiers that work for you to control the world and not be spun through the world by the master signifiers of others. That's the difference, if that makes sense. I think I did one for this. Yeah, so there's thousands and tens of thousands of pages of commentaries and texts about things like koans and Buddhist sutras and things like that. What do they mean? What's right? Let's debate it out. And you can read some of there's several really good books about Buddhist debate in the Tibetan tradition. You can read, which are fascinating, because they don't ever really figure this out. If only I could reveal what the Buddha really meant. It's kind of like a trick, kind of the trick answer. But I don't know the answers, but these are my questions. So I'm comfortable. This is kind of Socratic, right? What did Socrates say? I don't know, but I'm comfortable with this not knowing, this not knowing. Right? So that's kind of the object he is. I don't really know the answers, but I'm very, very comfortable with the questions that I framed. Could we create a debate that would work like this? I mean, the Buddhists have already done it, but I don't think we could do that. Could we do something, not even modeled on that, but could we create a debate that would provide students mastery instead of frustration and capitulation to the words and the desires of others, such as corporate capitalism, consumer capitalism, military-industrial complex, etc. ad nauseum? That's the question that I did all that just to get to this, which is, I'd like to know, I would really like to know who is playing it. I'd really like to know how to get it. And I have further ideas about this, but I'm out of time. So I think I'll leave it there in the interest of maybe having some time for discussion and questions, because I know I hit you with a lot of weird stuff. But this is the thing I'm working on now. I'm trying to think about how to do this. This is what I want to make. And it's not easy to think about that, because there's a lot of said of it too. So my background is I taught policy debate most of my career, NDT, CETA, all that. I got into BP in 2004. And I haven't really taught debate in a number of years, maybe 4 years or so. I haven't been actively involved in about 4 years. But this is what I want to create. So I think I'll leave it there. And open up to your questions, comments, and thoughts. Any response is completely valid. When you're talking about psychoanalysis, you have to take everybody's response.
Let's before we do the first question, let's first give Steve a round of applause. And then I want to say that I think it's fair to say that this talk is challenging in a number of ways. Maybe challenging to our expectations, challenging theoretically, maybe challenging to some of the things we care about or have commitments about. So feel free to ask any questions, and I'm sure Steve will be happy to give you a response. And give a response. And it seems like Zach has the first one. So go ahead, Zach.
Well, I'm sorry. I was really confused by like 90% of it.
Yeah, me too.
Can you clarify exactly what the problem was with, I don't really care policy or BP, it seemed like a criticism very similar. Just pick one of those and try to like summarize what you were saying the issue was.
I'll give you a big, long kind of analogy.
Okay.
So imagine you think teaching chemistry is pretty important, right? You think chemistry is pretty important, so you assign it as part of the curriculum for everyone to learn, because you're like, well, understanding chemistry is kind of like how you understand a lot of things in the world. But chemicals are really dangerous, so we're not going to use any chemicals. What we're going to do is write on little slips of paper things like H2SO4, things like that. And then we're going to put them into little tubes, have the students do that, and we're going to be like, say boom when you put the other one in, boom, and that's going to teach them chemistry. That's the problem with the modern debates. We've stripped out all of the interesting part, all of the danger, all of the actual reactive property, and we're saying argumentation can be understood. Actually, the best way to understand argumentation is to take all of the human elements out of it and just teach it as if it's an automaton, like a robot. BP does that, policy debate does that, but it does it out of this idea of enjoyment. So from the Wake Forest video, it's this enjoyment of I'm going to pull everything else away about debate and just be this pure intellectual subject, this pure subject of the form of persuasion, this pure champion subject of aggression, domination, right? So it's almost like a refinement and a flattening of the human being. Like in BP, it's almost kind of like this refined kind of like global citizen, right? Oh, I'm not affected by culture. I'm not affected by silly things like that. I'm a citizen of the world. I can look at economic policy and tell you exactly what's right. I mean, this is also the kind of stuff that Karl Popper was into. You're familiar with Karl Popper? Karl Popper is a philosopher. He wrote a book called The Open Society and Its Enemies. It's like a 2-volume book. Who are the enemies of the open society, right? It's a funny list. Plato, Marx, and Freud, but not because of their ideology. Why are they the enemies of the open society? Because Popper believed their theories could explain virtually anything without having to look at any test case. They could never be wrong. So Marxists can always explain what's going on in terms of, class consciousness, or, the veil of ignorance, all this kind of stuff. And a Freudian, Popper gives the example of the Freudian, he's like, I don't even need to see your child to know what's wrong with them. And they say the thing, right? So, I mean, of course, Popper's playing fast and loose with these very vulgar Marxism, vulgar Freudianism, things like that. But it's kind of an interesting thing to say. The unfalsifiability of it is what makes a theory bad. And that's why we know Popper today, because Popper says for a theory to be good, there have to be conditions under which that theory could not offer any explanation. And that's how we'd accept it. So I think that's also another example, too, is that the idea that you could have an argumentation that would work cross-culturally, interculturally, internationally, about things like economics, justice, freedom, it's kind of weird. Like, all of those things need to be deeply involved in any kind of thing to teach an argument. Now, you can dismiss this argument, as people have done in the past, with a very simple kind of claim that people have got me on, which is like, yeah, but debate's fun. And I'm like, well, sure. Tournament debate's fun, and I enjoy it, and I make a lot of friends, and I get a lot out of it. That's great. It should not be the only game in town. It's my response. Oh, hopefully that helps. Go ahead, you can ask a follow-up.
Well, I was just going to say a follow-up. I did PF debate in high school, which I don't know if you're familiar, but
of course.
I've
taught everything.
I'm so similarities to policy and sort of the same format. It was my interpretation of PF debate that I was never learning how to practically persuade people in real life, but that the value of the activity was because it forced you to do research, to defend a side, and it got you to spend a lot of time looking up information and talking about issues. And that the value of the debate wasn't that the debate actually created knowledge or necessarily taught you a practical level of persuasion in your daily life, but that debate itself was sort of fun and the preparation for debate was intensely valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a valid defense, but again, why is that the only game in town?
Fair.
Like, we gotta learn, like, democracy is at stake. I can say it like one of our former presidents. Folks, people are saying democracy's in real trouble, folks. Right? We can kind of twist that kind of style around. Like, I think this kind of thing would really help. But I mean, your point's well taken. I mean, we do need this kind of information processing, but a part of information processing is to know the ideology behind why that information was created. Like maybe Steven Crowder just showing the National Institute of Health data over and over again. We have no idea of the ideological background of these people researching trans identities. We have no idea how they feel about that. It is the best way to understand a human being, their motivations, their biology. Like, isn't poetry an equally wonderful way to understand a human being? Shouldn't we put an equal sign there? Why did we think one is the best one? Weird, right? In the back.
I was just wondering, this model here, isn't this essentially what we do with something like qualitative debate, except more specifically context and process?
Sure. I mean, I think in policy debate, they're still sort of trying to get to a kind of a purity of argument or a purity of politics, but I do think you could map this onto some of the more interesting modes of policy debate. Oh, like the cross-ex period? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, he says no, but I do think there's an interesting idea here, which would be like, so when we think about cross-examination, what could that be? Like, what would happen if we treated cross-examination like, and asking these kind of questions like we would in analysis, is what that makes me think of. But I haven't thought about that. Cross-examination is one of these things that split the national organization. Very much like, there was a time when there wasn't a Catholic church, it was just the church, right? And then some people were like, oh, we don't like how this is done, so they created another, then it became the Catholic Church, and then the Protestants, right? So very much like this, there was debate, there was NET debate and CETA debate. The CETA debate broke with NET debate for one very specific reason, which is cross-examination is important, and in NET it's like they don't use it. And so there are pages and pages of stuff from 1982, mostly, when the schism occurred, where they talk about the value of cross-examination. So looking at those old documents might be interesting to kind of pursue this question, I think. It's an interesting idea, I wonder.
It's just a comment and then a question. To get to your model of debate, which are like this idea, I think the collegiate level is almost too late. Like the idea of collegiate civic debate, just because we're conditioned. I think after curiosity stops with an acute after third grade, right? Like the why game, it goes from being cute to being annoying. So I think, especially in like middle school and early high school, I feel like the strategies teachers use is what's the right answer? Find X, find this. By the time we get to college, and I mean most high schools don't really have intense debating programs. At least my school just had speech. I didn't have it in college.
Right.
I think by the time we get here, this idea of being comfortable with not knowing is not something that schools teach us to do. So I feel like to get to this model, it wouldn't just be a new model of debate, but more of a outreach to middle schools, how to have conversations, outreach to high schools, and like being okay with that not knowing position. Because you can't really make a model of that unless people who are participating in that model are comfortable with that. And I think the way we're all taught in K through 12, it breaks that mentality before we can even try this model.
Yeah.
So that's just one thing that I was thinking of the whole time. And then I guess the other note was on pedagogy. I think as Zach's point about like potential benefits. I don't like a lot of stuff about debate, like how you doesn't make you think. It's more about the format than about you being creative and curious and actually engaging with stuff. But the idea of like a constraint-based argument, almost like if you're stuck to the constraint of the format, using that format, but rather than creating this competitive, hey, I'm doing this format to win, to feel good about winning in this format, but rather this format is constraining. Let's acknowledge the constraints. Let's talk about the constraints. Let's have a debate, and then when you go out into the real world without these constraints, you can take the skills you learn from that constraint-based curriculum. So I guess, can you do that? And then, do you think that's feasible? And
yeah, no, this is all great. First thing is like, I wish I could disagree with your first comment. It's very depressing. But I mean, it made me think: isn't this the model of Montessori education? Wouldn't this be what this is? If you're familiar with Montessori, I don't know if you haven't had it.
No, my parents pulled me out of a daughter preschool to a Montessori, so like we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. But I think a lot of
when you get to 5th grade, you can't really. This isn't really what's happening.
Yeah.
I wonder about that. I wonder if maybe the problem is much deeper than that. But I always feel like debate always cuts. It sort of cuts against the classroom model of education, or like what Paulo Freire has called the deposit banking model of education pedagogy.
No, I think it does, but I think it's like you do debate maybe once or twice a week, and you go to school 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. You pull a kid out and say, hey, you know what? Be open-minded. Don't think about getting the right answer. And
you gotta freak out.
Yeah, you can't really do much in that time. So by the time you break that mentality, you don't have enough time to debate.
Yeah, it's contextual too. I mean, I think part of the problem of something that vexes me, like the teaching of the fallacies, something that we do in my field day in and day out, is also very vexing to me because when you teach the fallacies under the constraints of the classroom, it's worse than useless. And like Martin Baldry, who's a Dutch philosopher, has pointed this out, where he's like, any example of fallacy or any place where a fallacy is easily identifiable is kind of useless, because if it's so easily identifiable, the persuasive power of that argument is in question. You wouldn't have to identify the fallacy because people would be like, I just don't buy it. This is dumb, right? The vibe of the argument would kill it. But then on the other side, if you do identify a structural fallacy in a very highly complex argument, it's a baby bathwater dilemma. So the only response we have to fallacies is throw the argument out. We might be refusing to do something very good because of a structural error. So this is the aporia fallacy that Martin Baldry points out. I know that's not really relevant to what you asked. So is it possible to do something where you teach the constraints of argument? And I would say yes, but I think the biggest difference is to put an audience there, because those constraints in the audience are unknown to them if Lacan's correct, and this is how people come into the room. It's unknown to them. It's also deeply immersed in intersectionality. Like they might have constraints based on how they are thinking of themselves and the intersection of their identity. And then a good speaker can say, but what about this role? And flip it and say, oh, now I'm very concerned, right? This is sort of like the rhetoric of things like the I don't know how you feel about the success of it, but something like Black Lives Matter is trying to like flip that around and say, now think about this in a different kind of position. It's not a question of human life, it's a question of this particular context, this particular situation you might not be familiar with, right? And they had some success with that, which I think was quite good at twisting it around. The other thing is, I think I'm with William Hawley Davis, like 1916 on this, which is the idea that those constraints exist anyway, and they come from human beings being in the room hearing the argument. And that would be a much more realistic way to do it, because it's always moving, it's never quite there. The thing about tournament debate and format debates is always like, that's really kind of a no-go area. Now in policy debate, that's become the heart of policy debate, is arguments about what's permissible. You know, can I stand up and challenge debate itself? And in the Urban Debate League several years ago, there was a very funny, it's kind of tragic too. So they would have this national tournament, the Urban Debate League. The Urban Debate League goes and spends millions of dollars from donors to put debate in extremely poor performing schools. So-called inner city schools are what we would know from the Civil Rights Act, Title III schools. Schools that are in very impoverished areas, that have no resources, nobody wants to teach there. Very bad places. I've done debate outreach with these places, and the students are great, and they love debate. It's very different than what they're getting normally. But the Urban Debate League is doing this. The Urban Debate League, one of the most popular cases one year was ban the Urban Debate League as the affirmative case because debate is racist. And then they used Urban Debate League material to show that the rhetoric constructed these students in a racist tone. Now this case was so popular, it went to the national level, the national tournament. Everybody's running it. So the director of the Urban Debate League has all of these people who are giving millions of dollars to the Urban Debate League judging these debates. Now are they going to be able to do what the chief adjudicator has told them to do? No, don't put your personal, just judge the argument here. They're like, wait, I'm spending, like I'm an executive at Microsoft and we're putting $250 million into this. And they're all saying like, you know, and then these like teenagers are like, the blood is on the hands of the sponsors of the Urban Debate League tournament for perpetuating racism and violence in our culture. This is already on 89. You know, this kind of thing. What are they going to do, right? So the chairman of the Urban Debate League had to send out a memo and be like, look, I'm all about free speech and everything, but like, let's use some common sense and think about who's in the room. That constraint is much more powerful than the fun kind of gamey constraint of being able to argue against debate based on the rules of debate in a tournament. Does that make sense? So they're both constraints. Which one is the constraint that's going to serve the student better? The gaminess Vegas model constraint, the card counting constraint, or the constraint of how do I make the argument I believe in an ethically responsible way to where this person could understand it and assent to it. Right? That's what I'm more interested in. Which I think, I mean, maybe this model doesn't get there, but I think as an educational model, it's like, look, I'm going to be okay because I know how to handle what's coming at me in the world. Right? Which is kind of what the master saying. Oh gosh, I just said something wrong. Let's have you do that.
Okay, I guess I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
Well, the first comment I have is that I don't necessarily think that, and I am new to debate, so I don't think that it's necessarily like school that makes people closed-minded. I think it's where they come from. I know for me, just because I am a political kind of person, I do want to be open-minded to different ideas and to like learn different stuff. So like if I do get into politics, I know. And I want to know, and I'm aware that I don't know. So I feel like it's easy for me to like want to know and want to be persuaded. I feel as if that your notion for a debate, and again, I am new to this, is like almost like if we ran it like it was a Socratic seminar and that there was like an audience in the background and there's multiple people talking and then there's like, you know, there's the disagreement. And I don't know if you've argued with anybody or debated with somebody during reading class or English class about like, oh, this character is definitely like this, they would never do this in real life, like blah, 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 blah. Like, I think that honestly doing something like that would be more fun, especially if everyone had the knowledge of it. Especially because I feel like most of the stuff that I have debated so far, half of it I did not even believe in nor care about. And I feel as if that, like, when you do care about it, it makes you want to know more or want to learn more. So, like, how would you go about, like, making arguments like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great comment, great issue. I mean, maybe the model of debate is something that, like Howard Woodward, the students should come up with a topic that interests them and just do it on their own. Like when we defer to national organizations or other kinds of tournaments that want to follow a particular set of rules, like BP or CETA or something like that. They said, this is the topic, or this is how the topic's going to be. They're pushing a kind of a, it looks like it's like, you know, like you said, the topics you don't care about. Anybody who's like deeply invested in BP would be like, that's fine. Because what you're learning about is how to make argument, right? That's the field of knowledge. And it's set by a particular understanding of what constitutes an argument, which is the master secret. It's not, you don't care about it because it's not you didn't have a hand in making it. Like in this model, you make it, right? So this is kind of what you want. So maybe that's kind of the way to do it, is to think about how can I express, and this is a real challenge for BP, less so in policy debate, how can I express the things I care about under any motion, under my own terms, quite literally, my own language, and still have competitive success and get feedback that helps me really think about what I'm learning. It's a real challenge. I had students try to do that where they were like, I'm going to try to bring in a feminist theoretical perspective on every motion, no matter what side, no matter what position. Like, and was it successful? Not really. I mean, it was very challenging and tough and very hurtful, because a lot of judges would say, why are you like not debating? Why are you not doing, why, you don't want to be here, don't be here. Right? Which is kind of the disciplinary smack back, the disciplinary clap back, that kind of knowledge, which shows that there is a master principle, kind of reveals that. But in your case, I don't know, I think organizing, one of the things I like to do is organizing my own debate. Thinking about that maybe is something that the team could do, and having that conversation might be kind of productive. But it is fun to have that English class debate, you're absolutely right. Why is it fun? Because there's an audience there, the audience is familiar with the same text, and everybody knows that everyone's opinion needs to be defended, and there's not any of this like, kind of like, well, I don't really, I'm uncertain I can enter this because I don't have the appropriate facts, or I can't speak the appropriate civic dialect. Might be a way to think about it. So we want to remove those things, because like in BP you get that civic dialect. In policy debate you get that knowledge barrier. And you don't really know enough about debate theory to make that kind of argument. I don't know, I hope that answers your question. It's a great comment, great, I hope it helps. But the idea that we have to capitulate to national organizations or global organizations to debate is false. We can create our own debate culture right here. I mean, it's a lot of work. Somebody, the guy in the purple hat, yeah.
So I just want to clarify something. Your main criticism of like those first two forms of debate that you were talking about was the focus on either like form, like British parliamentary does, like how to rebut or whatever, or like the strict focus on knowledge. So, like, I would argue that based off of your definition of like what debate is, isn't all of academia like a debate against the world, like you're making a claim and then you have to defend it? And then if we're not focusing in, if your problem comes down to like logic, doesn't that like knock down a lot of things that like for example, like logic, like philosophical logic, math is built on top of that.
Sure.
Physics is on top of that, so on and so forth. If we knock down logic and we knock down the focus of like philosophical argument, then how are we supposed to have mathematical proofs and trust them? How are we supposed to have physics if we can't trust proofs? So on.
Sure, right. Isn't physics going through this panic right now? Isn't that what's going on?
Yeah,
right. Okay. So,
yeah.
Just making sure. I'm not that familiar, but aren't they kind of? Yeah, they're kind of going through that kind of. I read a lot of pop books on physics. Some people like Brian Greene. Pop physics, so like, I don't know what I would call it, but this is great. This is a great question. So, how do I want to handle this? So, the first question: isn't academia you against the world? I mean, I don't know. There's so many ways to talk about that. It's such a really great question, because, like, in graduate school, you do kind of feel like that, and that's like kind of the fun of graduate school. Is you're like, I am not going to be dominated by the sign of the master. I'm going to cut my own way. I'm going to make my own thesis. I'm going to create my own master signifiers. Create my own research. And they kind of push you that way. And graduate school, like at least in a PhD program, might be like this, because I know my professors treated me like this quite a bit, where they were just like, "What do you have to say to me?" I'd be like, "What should I be doing? What should I be reading? I don't know." No, you really do know. I don't know. Go leave me alone, right? And that's what PhD is like. It's very alienating. It's very lonely. It's very aggressive, and that's why a lot of people don't finish. I'm not saying I'm like better than those people or whatever. I think if someone has a PhD, you can know certain things about them. One, they're very good at following rules and meeting deadlines. Secondly, they're very esoteric. this kind of weird like subset of stuff. But I think academia probably, I mean, Lacan is talking about academia with these things. The Discourse of the University is what he says being in the university is like, which is where people say, well, this is what you need to know. And you're like, well, why? And you're like, don't ask that question. It makes it seem like there's some kind of insidious motives hidden behind the curtain, right? Like, you want to be part of this knowledge that is neutral and known and objectively valid. On the question about mathematical proofs, I think these things are always, there's two different views on it, on logic and things like that. Internally, there are these debates happening about whether or not these proofs can be, and they're always kind of continuously happening. But that's kind of kept out of the view of other people. I think this is really very well detailed in this book. It's not really about mathematics, but I think the argument holds, which is the structure of scientific revolutions. Have you read that book? It's great. Thomas Kuhn, and he talks about how science appears to be this progressive, advancing, positivistic kind of thing, but really it's just like they go along for a while and collect knowledge, and they make a mistake, and they go rerun all the experiments and clean it all up. And that's what a scientific revolution is. But it applies to a lot of these fields that portray themselves as sub 2, as a field of knowledge, but really there was like a motivation behind it. Once they discover something weird, like X-rays, for example, you have to go rerun everything else. Like when Apollo astronauts landed on the moon, what was the very first thing they did? It wasn't really made public. What's the first thing they did? There's a video of it you can find on YouTube, but it'll shock you. They were like, we got to really figure out if this Newtonian thing that we've been using for a very long time is actually true. So the astronaut was like, okay, I'm going to do this weird thing. And he's just like an Air Force guy. He was like, here we go. He's a lead, weight, and a feather. Here we go. And every physicist around the world went, we might have a lot of work to do tonight if this doesn't work. And dropped it. And they both hit the surface of the moon and said, whoop, we don't have to rewrite physics. So we're always in that boat. But the way it's presented rhetorically is that there's some things that are immutable. And I think it's just the way it functions. And also there's context here too. That's the other point I want to make. So a mathematical proof will work under the conditions that a mathematical proof is meant for. But when we get in trouble, we start to globalize these things and say, you know, why don't politics work in these ways that are more familiar to us? Like a great example of this is like the bizarre combination of baseball and criminal justice. 3 strikes legislation. Why? Right? Aren't human beings more complicated than like the Twins or whatever? I don't know what baseball team I should reference this on. Brewers, sorry, Brewers. Right? Not a sports guy. But I don't know if that addresses what you're getting at. I would say that like my goal isn't necessarily to upend the debate practice that's going on, but to say that we should be very well aware of the products that we're getting out of the debate practices. And I think some of those products are not in line with what democratic orders around the globe need right now, as the world continues to shift right incredibly rapidly in incredibly scary kind of ways.
As a follow-up, like, there's that book Against Method that came out in the 80s.
Oh yeah, Against Method, that's Paul Feyerabend.
Yeah. And he like argues like anarchism is the only way to do science, right? But like
methodological anarchism.
Yes, right. Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Right. He's still bound by something.
Sure.
So the common thread is still logic, I would say. If it's methodological, he's taking away the knowledge. He's ignoring things and being methodologically anarchist by ignoring knowledge, but still following logic.
Yeah, I think I would push back on that and say that he's being logical, but I think he would say if you have a preferred method that you think explains the world, you're probably doing it wrong. Because a lot of times our love for a particular method will make us strip out the most interesting things about a research question just so we can apply our method that we're dedicating to. So a lot of times method is like politics. You might have friends like this. Oh, I'm an Althusser. I'm a Freudian. I'm a Marxist. You know, and then everything interesting about the case is stripped out just so they can apply their favorite theory. And I think that's what Feyerabend's getting at. But yeah, he does have a method. But I wonder if you could, in the book, I wonder if you could say, is it a performative contradiction to say the only method you should use is anarchy? Is anarchy a method at that point? I think, in my thinking of that book, it's been a while since I've taught that book. I teach it a lot in research methods class, not to have a favorite kind of method. I would say that Feyerabend is probably saying, you've got to make sure you understand that your choice of method is ideologically select, is probably what he's saying, which I think is a reasonable thing to think in terms of, if you want to think about research as problem solution, which has problems, but if you want to think about research as inquiry, that's a really dangerous, that's a really insightful critique, right? Because if your idea is that I'm doing open inquiry and I'm expanding human knowledge, but you're completely married to one or two methods, then you're probably leaving out all kinds of interesting questions you might not have. And so this is why, back to Kuhn's book, this is why it's always he starts that book off great. He's like, why is it always the young people in physics, the young people in chemistry, the young people in science who create the new theories? If science worked the way it presents itself, why isn't it the 70-year-old tenured guy? Well, it's because it's all ideological, right? So like, why don't we run that experiment again? Oh, we run that experiment all the time, da-da-da-da-da. It's true, don't waste your time. And then the young people do it, and lo and behold, atomic weapons, whatever. I mean, maybe that's not the best example of great science. A new drug that extends our lifespan 50 years is better. Maybe not, I don't know. Do you want to be around 50 years?
Some opinions are, blatantly offensive to a group of people. And
Sure.
where I'm going with this is, I'm curious, is there ever, a specific time where it is important to, censor or tell people what the truth is, or at least what they cannot say, so as to, protect people and keep them at the table?
Yeah, that's such a great question. As a rhetorician, I'd say, yeah, you always want to be cautious of that. But you also can't pretend like it's not there. You can certainly say, there are certain things that just cannot be said. And you put parentheses around it, and you can say. To kind of give an example of that. I don't know if that's what you're getting at. But in rhetoric, there's all kinds of ways we can do that. And sometimes you're in a situation where you're arguing for something you think is very important. And everybody does it. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to hear it. This is the most difficult rhetorical challenge, I think, trying to make an argument. The best thing that you can do is try to use the things the audience brings in. A lot of times when we think about debate, we think about argument, we think about it's us. It's kind of like us versus the world, right? So we have to bring in all the facts and all the material. We have to be stacked. So it's almost like these bad 80s action movies where the guy's going to assault the enemy compound by himself. And so there's this montage of sticking a gun in every possible belt and pocket, grenades, and there's this action music, and the knife, and, like Rambo or something. It's we're kind of ready. And this is the way we kind of imagine going into an argument like that. But everybody's bringing resources with them. And the trick is to try to think about what kind of commonplaces you might have even with a very hostile audience. There are some values and things you do share. And maybe that's a way in to talk about it as well. As far as offensive terms and offensive ways of speaking, that's always tough because it's always in motion. I deal with this all the time in teaching, right? Because I'm I'm much older than you guys. And there's certain ways that you guys like to speak about things like gender identity, things like that. I'm still kind of learning. I'm still learning about the way that we talk about people who are not white has changed about 10 times in my teaching. What's the appropriate terminology? And I'm open to this kind of stuff, but you always kind of make a mistake. I always make these mistakes all the time. The thing is to try to own it and then use it as a way to create common ground with the audience to get that thing across. As far as fidelity to the truth, I think that comes in second place as a rhetorician. Fidelity to the audience in front of you and keeping that ethical responsibility in mind that it's I have something to say I want them to believe. How can I make sure I've met my ethical responsibility to give them the best possible chance to understand what I have to say? And so it happens the understanding, feeling, agreement. Agreement's a distant thing. It might be enough to get understanding and a little bit of sympathy. It might be a successful argument in a situation like that. It's definitely not going to be a victory. And oftentimes arguments go on for 20, 30 years, especially in academia. And then someone will be like, oh yeah, you know what? That book I wrote 20 years ago. Bad idea. So it happens on a longer timeline than debate too. So I don't know if that it's such a good question. You can write a book on it. So I hope that. Okay, great.
Yeah, this is just a comment, but I found myself smiling when you were talking about how in DP you're so focused on the language and how to win the debate. And I've been doing a debate as well, vaguely, and so I myself hyper-focusing on that as well. But however, it's here, so the judges often will give closed deliberation, and so after the debate is done, we'll find that 8 of us just start. Sometimes we're just talking about what's going on in our lives, but sometimes we'll continue on the conversation, but without that extra constraint that Maria was talking about. And sometimes that's what I leave debate thinking about, that conversation when you get people's biases and backgrounds, and we can almost we're all acting as judges and we're all having our own opinions, and that's almost more valuable. So I don't know what kind of debate that would fall into. But it's just interesting how every session we have kind of this ordered, structured DP debate where you can take the language from one motion to the next and see how similar it really is, just with different examples just thrown in there, and then that conversation that's so much more natural that happens after every session as well.
Yeah, I often felt that way too in my debate life, is that I enjoyed the moments between the rounds, talking to colleagues and talking to students, much more than the actual debates. And I would get frustrated when they'd be like, the pairing's up, and I'm like, oh man, we're having such a good conversation. So a couple of my friends and I said the same thing. So I started a podcast many years ago. BJ knows about it. This podcast that meant to just be the moments in between. So I just have other BP coaches and other students come on, and we would just talk like we would talk in a tournament between the rounds. It was relatively successful. You can go listen to the back episodes if you want to. The name of the podcast is In the Bin, which is British slang for being at the bottom of the tournament, in the bin. It's like, oh, what? Like the judges will talk like, what round did you judge? Oh, I was in the bin, which means you judge somebody who's like, 03. They've gotten straight fours or something. And that's the round they got to judge. Like, bin round. Like, the British are also like warm and fuzzy about their debate terminology. It makes you feel really happy and all this. So I just called the podcast In the Bin. And then you go listen to it. Try to do that. The other thing about this is like you can think about it like why would an English professor assign something really stuffy and old and inaccessible? Like I mean I'm not English. I can't think of a text like this. But why do we have to read these old stuffy kind of texts? And one of it might be that structured, kind of frustrating, limited thing allows for the conversation to happen, which is where the real teaching comes in. So then you can connect it and it gives you more connecting points to articulate the values that we might share in the classroom. This might be the reason why public school is so important, and why it's important that you read things like, I don't know what you hated to read in high school. It's a book you hated. Johnny Goes Gone. That was very quick. This is a teenager. Right, so something like that, you read that, you're like, why are we reading this? This is so stupid. And then a good teacher will say, how do you feel about this? What are the connections? What are the ways these things come out today? And that gives you a kind of a sense of what the public is, right? So in education and pedagogy might give you a sense of what the public might be or what they might stand for. And you with other young people are like, yeah, maybe loyalty is important. Maybe Johnny should have gotten his gun. I don't know this story. I'm thinking about, who did I hate to read? It's like, unfortunately, I remember like trudging through Great Expectations. And I mean, Dickens is a great writer, no question, but I was like 15 or something. Why? Why is this so long? This kind of yeah.
How would you define both, I guess, the civic discussion and the civic debate? And then what are the merits of both? And what are the goals of both?
Yeah. So I think discussion is one of these things that's like very unmodeled, it's very kind of open. And in a discussion, nobody really has a stake. So discussions usually kind of take like, well, I feel. But there doesn't really feel like there's any obligation to push back on what anybody else says. It's more of an adding to. This is very similar to like if you've ever read David Baum's On Dialogue. You read this book? So that's another book. This happens every time people are like, have you read that? Have you read it? People are like, oh my god, what have you not read? Like I just keep mentioning books. David Baum is a very famous person in physics. He won the Nobel Prize for inventing this thing you might have heard of called a laser. It's like, this is a good reason to win a Nobel Prize, right? So he's an optics guy, physics optics guy, and as he got older, he said, you know what? Studying photons has made me think about politics. People are generally like photons. They're bouncing around everywhere, and they're doing all these weird things. We're not really sure where they are sometimes, and sometimes they appear to be in two different places at the same time. All this stuff about physics, but if I could concentrate photons on one place with enough intensity, they can cut through anything. That's a laser. A laser, literally, you can create a laser that will cut through any material. He's like, I want to be able to do this with people, with politics. So he created On Dialogue, where he's talking about discussion the way I would say to model it is read David Baum's On Dialogue, and he talks about doing these debates about nothing, where you get people in a room and you just have an open conversation and people push on each other. There's Baumian societies across the U.S., across the world, who try to use what he came up with. So he had this amazing second career in language discussion. Civic debate is much more structured, and it definitely has to have oppositional sides, I would say. Because what you're trying to make there is you're trying to force the audience to question some of their own assumptions. In a discussion, I don't think you need to do that. A discussion might be a preamble to a debate, but a debate can also lead to a discussion, which you're talking about. So the relationship is unclear. But I would say the difference between that is debate, ironically, requires so much more agreement to happen than a discussion does, which is not the way we really think about it. But in a debate, you have to be like, what's the topic? Who's going to speak on what side? How many speakers are going to be? How long are they going to speak? Are we going to have cross-examination? What's the questioning going to be? When is the audience going to question? Are we going to have coffee? I guess that's a discussion question too. But all of that has to happen for debate. Debate is based on agreement, ironically.
I guess the reason I was asking this is I love the Socratic seminar point you've made, but I guess the idea of, in terms of the wrongs that are with debate, like as you were answering Calvin's question, a lot of the wrongs are structural. Sure. If you take away structure from debate, it's going to become, like even your podcast, a bit more like a discussion than debate, which there's a ton of merits to that, but I guess the one merit I always had to debate was Socratics, or at least like big groups, they tend to be, at least depending on the composition of the class or whoever's in the room, there's like that reciprocity, like, you know, we always hear about, like, I'm sure we've all been in one English class where it's like the two boys playing devil's advocate, they're speaking for the class, and then every non-straight white man identifying, you know what I mean? They
Right,
yeah. So I guess the idea of structure has a ton of harms, and obviously reduce complexity, but also force structure also forces a degree of participation from everyone and forces. So would getting rid of structure from debate just turn into educated discussions?
Yeah, I wonder if you could, I mean, all these things have a structure. I wonder if you could do that. I mean, there's always a structure present, and I think the harms come from thinking like the discussion, like in the English class, you mean, that it's not being controlled, that it is a neutral space where everyone can speak freely. It would be a bad teacher who doesn't think those ideologies about who can speak freely, who's not taking a risk speaking up, don't come into the classroom, right? So the people who are non-white, non-cis, heteronormative kind of identities, they're taking huge risks by speaking up that a white man isn't taking. Right? I think that kind of thing needs to be dealt with because that's a structure that's being imposed by ideology about what the normal is. Who's the normal speaker? That's something we talk about better all the time. It's a white man behind a podium in a suit, right? That's what everybody thinks of. Like,
or not even that, it's like any different idea. If anyone in the whole room is the same, this is an idea that isn't fit in. Yeah.
Right. So so structure is inevitable, I'd say. And so one of the ways of thinking about it is being like, okay, if we have this structure, what do we get? Which is what attracted me to this model in the first place, is that there are results from these different kinds of structures. But I don't know if you can get out of it. I think a Socratic seminar has a particular structure. But I think maybe there ought to be a meta conversation about what's being permitted here too. And like David Baum talks about that as well in his model. So I think that model might be very fruitful for you thinking about what this might look like. So, in the back.
Well, actually, sorry to interrupt you, Colin. Speaking of structure, let's get anyone who hasn't had a first question before we get.
Oh, okay. Oh, see.
So,
this is the thing.
Maybe I know I'm exemplifying.
You're doing the thing.
But let's get maybe Jason. I don't think has that a question.
Yeah. Can I ask, like, in the future, do you believe these methods of debate that you presented here today, do you think that they can coexist harmoniously? Do you think that, I guess, what I'm trying to say is that, truth be told, all these methods of debates have their own special pros and cons. Like, for example, it would be nice to have, like, a general audience of 400, 500 people who listen to our PhD debates here in Washburn, but we know that's not possible, so we just have, like, 1 or 2 judges for that matter. But also at the same time, something that we talked about, the constraints and limitations, but also, like, the habits that it induces, like, for example, what is the best way to win? Like, that kind of mindset that it creates. I feel like it also has, like, some positive effects. Like, the answers that you find asking yourself that question will make you inherently a better debater, a better communicator, and a better speaker. So I was wondering, what was your opinion on that? Like, does everything need to be like real life, or can there be like a segment of debate where it can be conceptual, practical, and have that kind of structure?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against like monastic practices. I think a lot of people like monastic practices. It's a tight-knit community. You're doing something weird and special together. Nobody else understands it, and it's feel pretty cool. So this is good. But I think that when that becomes the thing that we're leaning on in the university, it's like, well, I mean, the university doesn't really lean on a debate all that much. It's like, let's have a debate in class. And it's like a nightmare because there's no rules. The professor doesn't know how to do it. They just kind of think, let's just do it. It's like something that wouldn't even air on CNN, which is a pretty low bar. There's that consideration. But yeah, I don't think that. I mean, none of these practices are. I mean, I'm speaking pretty strongly saying they're bad. Lacan doesn't say any of these practices are bad. They're natural. And this is the way we speak to each other. And these are the positions we take on for different roles in our life: educating, commanding, learning, and revolutionizing. So they're pretty natural. I'm kind of using them a little bit heavy-handed to kind of get to what I'm wanting to do. But I don't know. I mean, when we say like we're learning the practices of best speaking, I'm like, well, but for who? Like, what does that look like? Like the best practices of arguing for who, right? But what's missing for me is audience. And I don't know if it's true that you can't get an audience here for a debate. I don't know if that's true. I bet you could. It's just a question of the capacity of thinking about what a debate is, right? So that's why I push some of these alternative ways, because we tend to think of what would a debate look like if there were 5 positions, right? Could you make a model of that that would make sense to an audience? I think you could. And you could try, and the worst thing that happens is 20 people come and they're like, I don't get it. But that's fine. That's kind of what the university's for, right? I think the university is for failure. Right? It's kind of weird. I mean, the admissions will never sit. The administration will go, shh, right? Because they want you to come here. You're going to get a great job, and then you kind of like learn some of your preferences and things that you didn't even really know how you thought before you come here. So it might be part of that too. But I think the problem with the tournament, which is something I've written against, research against, is that it always tries to conflate its practices with the natural and the normal and the real world. And then it kind of, in that Popperian way, says, well, politicians don't know how to debate. Look, I'm sorry, that's what we're stuck with, right? Like, we're stuck with Parliament, we're stuck with Congress, that's the way it works. So, how much of that do we would conform to them? Or do we want to have a revolution and get rid of these governments, which is that's a heavy lift, but some people would say, let's do that. Let's get rid of these governments and replace it with something else. Some people would say, let's learn how to do that so we can get on the inside and change it around. But by that point, much to the point that she was making out here about, at some point your imagination skills. It's like that great Murakami quote where like, everyone has a special gift and the role of school is just to grind it down. Right? That Murakami's beautiful quote. It's like, school doesn't know what to do except to crush the gift in each of us. Something like that. I have it on the door of my office. I'm always like, Dean, come by and see my office. School crushes the gift, right? So the tournament purports to be this kind of self-organizing knowledge argument, and then everyone who's not doing it that way is in error. And it's done so beautifully and so easily that anybody who does that, then we have a lot of reticence in participating in public debate, like going to town hall and giving a speech or something. Because we're like, man, I did it perfectly right, but nobody listened to me. And I've done stuff with collegiate debaters in front of public audiences. And the only thing that public audiences say to college debaters is, wow, you talk so fast. How do you do that? And that's the only thing they get. Only thing they get. And that's sad. Because everybody in this room is incredibly smarter than we are. How do we ethically express that way people can access it? Tournament's not interested in that. Tournament wants to award the best speaker. Tournament wants to award who got the most ones, who broke on 15. That's what the tournament wants. But it hides all that. It's like, no, this is excellence. We're rewarding excellence, not obedience. Rewarding excellence. And that's the flip. That's the mask. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if that. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah.
I have an applicational question. In Chinese workplace scenario, like a lot of in the college, a lot of important issues will bring onto the college top community level to discuss. Actually, the real process is before the final committee meeting, some department leaders already talk to the partial secretary of the college. Actually, we already have the final decision. But I used to think, what's the meaning of bringing it to the community meeting, like in a formal way? I think it's a process, it might be reasonable. So my question is, as a free hand, if like you join that community meeting, a lot of experience, like debater, very good, how to be assigned a theory, guidelines, techniques to that kind of meeting, to make it like you don't want to be silly.
Yeah, right. This is a very tough question, right? Yeah, a lot of things happen this way. Like in the U.S. Congress, we all know that all these decisions are made, like party level, behind closed doors, and things like that. Although we say we have transparency, and we can watch the Congress and all this stuff, they're all making these decisions. And the university is a big offender of this too. Like you go to some meeting, why do I have to be here? They've already made up their mind, and they just kind of go through the ceremony. So one of the things about debate is sometimes it is just a ceremony. It's just a symbol that has to be done as kind of an appropriateness thing. So the politics of interfering in that have to be somewhat creative. If you don't want, you can disrupt that ceremony and maybe the decision won't happen. So you have to be creative about what that would look like to disrupt that thing. And it might not look like, well, here are my reasons, and because the decision has already been made. So I'd be open to that. It might be questions or statements that engage the ceremony in kind of maybe a more ridiculous kind of way. And so what's been recommended by some people in terms of doing resistance this way is to take a principle that no one in the room would question and kind of take that principle on to a ridiculous degree. So, right, I can't think of a great example for you talking about it, but the idea of being really good at reason and evidence and stuff sometimes doesn't work when there's deep levels of power involved. So one of the things might be, if people are doing it behind closed doors, maybe you can go and meet with other people behind closed doors and say, here are some of the arguments you might not be considering here. Here are the issues that you can't say in a committee meeting or a university meeting. These can't be said publicly. But I know these are the things concerning you. maybe we can compromise this one, and you can maybe get what you want. But in a meeting where the power is that, I mean, I hate to be that guy, but I don't know if debate's going to help. I mean, we like to have that fantasy that it would. Like we have a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, old movie, Jimmy Stewart movie, where he like shuts the Senate down, fights for good, and truly wins. And it's a nice idea, but I don't know. I hope this answers your question, but I would say speaking to people one-on-one about those kind of concerns might be the way to go. And in the committee, people might not be ready to or eager to have the debate openly for some other political reason we might not know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me step in here. 2 hours has flown by. It's already 4:45. Our session is ended. I'm sure Professor Yano will stick around to answer other questions you may have, and he will be joining us for the banquet tonight. So let's give Professor Yano another round of applause.